Welcome back to the Cost Management Center podcast. I am Dwayne Deason, your host. I have a great guest with me, David Habib. David and I actually worked together at a company many, many years ago. David is also an author and is a specialist in AI. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is that how AI is going to impact the cost structure and cost platforms of companies. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Dwayne. It's great to be here.
David, I always like to start off with a little bit about the background, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and particularly how your focus became more on AI, because you've written a book on the subject, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, but I think that's an important aspect for the audience to hear about.
Yeah, for sure. My career-wise, I got into the internet very, very early on. I worked at an internet service provider in the call center. So I kind of fell into technology by accident, but I've been working on the internet side of technology since the late 90s. And I've been focused on like trying to play in every dimension of technology. So software development, quality assurance, what became cloud operations that we used to call sysops, back office IT, infosec. So I'm sort of voracious for all different aspects of it, and that's helped me sort of get to the executive level. So that kind of breadth and that kind of understanding. AI is sort of the logical next step in that conversation, right? It's an emerging thing and a disruptive thing, and because of the sort of time compression that folks like us have gone through, I thought I was able to start seeing patterns that we saw at the early stages of the internet repeating themselves in the early stages of AI. And I don't mean the technology, I mean what's going on in the marketplace, what's going on in businesses, what's going on in the industry. With Brightspot, I had the opportunity to sort of be at the forefront of helping shape the adoption of AI organizationally, right? So as CIO, like what are the policies? What's the governance? How are we going to educate people? How are we going to facilitate them using it? What are the risks, right? Security-wise, business-wise, what are we building into our product? And so I get to sort of help watch and help steer that. And the nice thing about where AI is now is that you don't have to be an expert to get your feet wet, right? So I also had the opportunity to like really play with it because I needed to teach other people how to use it. I needed to teach all of us how to govern it. So AI was sort of like a logical next step. And I felt like I was seeing a movie that no one else was seeing when we're talking about like what the implications are, right? And I know we'll get into that, but the book was really I wanted people to like see what I was seeing, because it's if you see it, you can prepare for it. And if you don't see it, like you have a store in the mall and the, e-commerce is going to come eat you and you're not going to know. Right. So,
right. So that's very helpful, and I appreciate that background. In fact, I did want to start with your book just because I actually read it. And I have it here for you. So it is. It's called Latent Vector, and I thought it was actually eye-opening for me because I've heard about AI, and I've worked with it in some, and I certainly understand how it's going to impact people's jobs and make them easier. But I think your book opened my eyes to the next level, which was much more disruptive, whereas opposed to companies slowly replacing employees with headcount is really what it was sold as, and now I think people are talking about not only just headcount, it's going to change everything. And your book was the first to kind of open my eyes to that. And what's interesting about it is just 2 or 3 months ago when I realized that, it's almost like the market just started making that acknowledgement 4 to 6 weeks ago, where they're starting to realize that all software is at risk of being replaced by AI. And so I felt like, oh, I knew that. And I really knew that because I had read your book.
It's really gratifying when people send me articles and they're like, this is what you were talking about.
Exactly. So hopefully you get some sort of recognition. But
you get nothing.
That's unfortunately not the way the world.
I get to sing I touch.
But so let's go ahead and frame this discussion in what your book presented. And so I'll let you kind of explain that, because I probably won't do it justice. But what the premise of your book goes as I was explaining, goes well beyond the idea of slowly replacing employees. Can you go into that just a little bit?
Absolutely. The premise of the book is based on like one notion, which is that the way AI stores and interacts with data is the disruptive part, right? Like the interactive technology, like the ChatGPT is fascinating, but the really disruptive part is actually what's going on behind the scenes. And so I spend a fair amount of time in the book talking about the history of information management, like going all the way back to clay tablets. But if you take a look at information management in the enterprise, it is a self-reinforcing sort of series of silos, and that's just the way it's always been. So the classic example is you're a B2B company, you've got 2,000 customers, you're doing fine, but you've got information in your AR system, you've got information in your CRM, you've got information in your like support system, information in, all these different systems that have information about your customer, right? And those different systems you have to upgrade them every year. And that when you upgrade them, you're actually just sort of reinforcing the silos. And so the problem for companies has always been but my answer to my question is actually a superset of each system, right? HR has a system. HR system meets their needs. They hire more people who know that system, and it's self-reinforcing. But the information, the decision port information, is actually scattered. And so the story I tell is like, if you have customers, they're opening support tickets, that's in one system. They're talking to their account manager, and Google's capturing the conversation, that's in a different system. How often are they paying their bills? When's their renewal? What's happening to their organization? Did they hire a new CEO? That's scattered, and there's actually no way for that information to come together. And so you layer on top of that a very large consulting industry whose job is to help you with that problem, right? So, and like a lot of expenses that businesses will see, as your IT investment increases, your spend on consultancies increases as well. And that is what I call in the book the information complex, like the information commerce complex, where it's a self-reinforcing thing. And then the regulations come in over the top. So the point is that AI is not, from that perspective, just a step function like the latest technology. It is a sea change, because what AI is good at is a diversity of data arranged in a non-deterministic way that's available for interaction, right? And so like vector databases, and I'm not an expert in the technology, but if you take that point, so we're no longer doing information silos that are glorified file cabinets. We now just have what I think we tried to do 10 years ago with data lakes, as you may remember, right? Mm-hmm. But a data lake was just a pantry. Like everything was still in its own bottles. It was just in one place. If you talk about how an AI deals with information, it is agnostic in like a very real way. And so the data stops having a deterministic nature to it. And so what that means is that if you are in the business of maintaining one of those silos or selling one of those silos or integrating one of those silos, if the silo is no longer necessary, you're in a situation where the bottom falls out of the market. Right. It's not a step change. It's not we have to go train consultants to know this new technology because everybody knows how to do that. It's entire multi-trillion-dollar industry is under threat. And so it's going to go into defensive mode. And we're already seeing, right? We saw IBM stock drop because somebody made a statement that, AI can do COBOL. I think we all intuitively knew that was going to be true. Right. But when it came out, the stock drops and people are gritting their teeth, and we're going to see that story more and more. And so that's the premise of the book, is that there is a very, very big part of what companies depend on from an IT perspective and what our market, what our economy depends on. That is the only reason it's not going to be taken over by AI is because people are pretending that that's not the inevitable outcome. That's the premise. That wasn't very brief, but that's the premise.
No, it's very helpful, and I'm going to try to put it into a little bit non-techie language. Because
yeah, please.
I'm a non-techie, and I want people to make sure they probably have listeners that might fall in my category. And so, essentially, it goes beyond, and because you talked about a company with 2,000 customers, it goes beyond the idea that, okay, do we need a Salesforce for CRM type of support when everything that you do goes into AI, and I can now, rather than be limited by what Salesforce can provide and its functionality, I basically can ask AI to give me anything in any format, and there's so much less friction in order to be able to get that information.
That's right.
And then even beyond that, it's that now it can go well beyond what Salesforce really can do right now between other applications and feeding that, so it can give me much better detail, much more. So not only is it a replacement for Salesforce, it is a superior offering. So it's not that I can just save because Salesforce extremely expensive product. Not only can I save that money, but I will actually have a better result because I chose to save that money.
That's not quite yet, but that's where I think we're going, right? And so like I have to, because I can hear my colleagues snickering, like,
right,
we're not there yet, right? The technology is still, it could still hallucinate, and it's still you're a victim of whatever the data is that goes in. But conceptually, you don't need to store your customer data in a CRM and your support data in a support system and your finance data in a finance system. Like, conceptually, you don't need to do that anymore. What you do need is the appropriate framework, right? Because and this, like, finance data isn't the spreadsheet. It's the reason that the data is there, right? Like, what do you need it for, from a compliance perspective, from a forecasting perspective, from a risk management perspective. And so the frameworks need to be overlaid on the data when somebody has to know that, right? So your AI mainframe is going to have a framework for HR, because it's a highly regulated part of the business. You don't want to just hope that works. So I think when we think about what is the next generation of enterprise software, I think it is very much a mainframe, right, where all of your stuff is. And then people like Salesforce.com or ADP or Workday, they're selling a framework, right? So they're the experts in the best way to manage HR data and what the relevant laws are in Tennessee, right? And so you imagine subscribing for that. So if you're trying to plan for how much is the thing's going to cost, which I think is what your audience is thinking about, it is necessarily dramatically less.
Yeah.
Right? Because providing a framework and providing expertise is cheaper.
Yeah.
Right? It's cheaper. And so their costs drop. Our costs should drop. Mm-hmm. They should require fewer people. And the people who are in the business of doing the integration between silo A and silo B are going to run out of runway. Right? So from a cost perspective, it's very, very favorable. Right. That trend should be very, very favorable.
Right.
The question is how much disruption stands between us and that point.
Mm-hmm.
Right. As and I talk in the book about the resistance machine that's already spinning up. Right. Naturally, businesses, individuals, governments are going to defend themselves against this, and that's going to drag out the trend. How long it takes for us to get there for several years, with the exception of startups. Right. And this is where I think the most interesting stuff is happening right now. I'm talking to a handful of AI based startups. And when you're starting from zero, you can start with nothing. You can start with, I have a database for all of my static files, and I have an AI that's doing cool stuff with my static files. And when I need to add new information, I just add new information. And I have a new product, and you just add it, and it's just there, versus, oh, you have a new product, I need you to go enter it into this system, and then we have to add SKU, and then we have to, right? It just becomes materially easier. And so the resistance machine is going to be trying to hold the line, and the startups are going to have that much more advantage coming out of the gate. So it may be for the next 4 or 5 years, the purchasing decision is, do you want to go with the incumbent and where they are in the Gartner Magic Quadrant and the way of doing things, or do you want to just be like, you know what, if I go with the upstart, it'll take them a week to fix my bug. It'll take them a week to add this feature, and it'll be cheaper all the way along the line. So I think that's and I'm jumping ahead probably, Dwayne, but I think that's the way that we need to start thinking about it is not, should it get cheaper, but should we keep feeding the old model?
Right.
Or should we, because we got our shareholders' money to deal with, should we be, is it a gamble anymore? And I personally don't think it's a gamble anymore because it's the iterative time is so fast.
That's great. And that actually does lead well into what I wanted to focus on a little bit at this point is what is today and what is tomorrow as far as from this aspect of it. So if you were starting with walking into a company, and it sounds like it would depend on the size of the company where they were, but let's start with a larger company, and you walked in that door and they have all the usual players of everything from Workday to Salesforce to they use AWS and all those type of things. Where would you start with them? And let's say that they're in the infancy of AI. I've heard a lot that almost everyone starts with Copilot. What would you start trying to get them to focus on to be able to, whether and particularly to reduce costs, their carrying costs of these things? Where would be your focus?
So I think that it's twofold. And I think everybody's doing the first one, which is let's figure out how AI fits with how our organization works, right? How do we make Claude make the folks in finance faster? Okay, that's useful, right? You're going to have an incremental value per hour for people. It's useful. Yeah, but that's not fundamental. I think what I would advise people to do is to take a step back and take a look at what we used to call their enterprise architecture, your full suite of IT investment, and correlate it to the business, right? Because I think. And you live this probably more than I have, but I think you get to a certain point where it's just habit to have a CRM, right? Everyone is comfortable with it. You're paying a lot of money for Salesforce, and all it is it's a glorified database of contacts and a few subscriptions for marketing, right? But everybody in your organization is going to have they're going to be religious about those things. That's how organizations work, right? This is where we store our tickets, and we need our tickets because if we don't have our tickets, then we can't do our ticket things. And so I think the value is to come in and say okay, but what's really important to the business in this system, right? If I lost 90% of the historical data right now for my ticketing system or for my support system, would it matter?
Yeah.
Right. And that's a hard question. And the answer is, by the way, almost always no, because support systems, your time horizon's this long and everybody wants to have the history. But if you're paying so that you have the history and the history is already in a sort of deterministic silo, then you can be you know what? I'm replacing that. That's a target for replacement. Not, I'm going to go back and negotiate with Atlassian, but this is a target for no, I'm not doing that anymore, right? We're going to reinvent how we think about this. We're going to build a system that is exactly what we need the system to be. And either we have people on board who can help us build that system, or we're going to find somebody to build that system. But I think in that sort of situation, you'll find that the tool in year 2 is going to be literally 10% of the expense, not half the expense, but 10% of the expense. And it also is going to free that business to be a lot more innovative, a lot more innovative, because right now we're all tethered to the systems, right? Can you throw up a support portal for me that shows uptime? No, because my support system doesn't know about uptime. You'll be able to sure, I can totally do that. Just give me the uptime data and then I'll just. So to go back to actually answering your question, I think I would look at the big cost pillars in your IT investment. This is an IT solution. AI is an IT solution. Where's your IT investment? You'll know in your gut, I'm overpaying for the value in this thing. And I'm addicted to it because nobody wants to migrate off of Salesforce because it's a nightmare and it's going to take 12 months. And so you become addicted to these things. Where are the places where it's disproportionate what I'm paying to what I'm getting? And think about if I could make a spreadsheet that contained all the data that I need that's in Salesforce.com, then why am I paying for Salesforce.com? Right. And I think because you can do it another way, that's valuable.
And I think it's good that we're talking about CRMs because one of the more sensitive areas in companies is always, of course, their revenue and their sales. Sure. And I'm sure there's a progressive chief revenue officer, but I'm not sure I've met them. So they really want to focus. They're 100% focused. Their targets and their incentives are all focused on we have to continue sales and revenue. And so you start telling them you're going to muck with their core system and they're going to have a heart attack. And I guess what I had thought that might, because you got me thinking, and what might start to evolve is that you can't go to them and say, look, I think we can do without Salesforce. I think they panic. They got too many areas to focus on. But what you could do is for a period of time, if it's cost effective to do this, is prove it to them. Where you run parallel, where you show them that, okay, look, we're going to record all your information and everything you're doing, or that type of thing. I'm going to show you the power of it, and therefore you alleviate their fear and their concern because you're able to prove it. And yes, there's a cost almost incremental for a very short period of time while you prove that out to them, and then that's when they start realizing that their reliance on traditional applications is not actually not founded anymore under the new world.
I think that's exactly right. I think if you're in a situation where like people are going to be like, yes, that's adorable, but we don't have time for that. Right. The bar is actually very low to implement a new system that is a better decision support system. Right, because like ultimately, what are you paying for? You're paying for decision support, or you're paying for operational support. And so, if you could say in a hypothetical universe, like I'm going to pull in the data that's in Salesforce. Salesforce is a perfectly good API. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pull that data in. I'm also going to pull data in from these 4 or 5 other systems, and then I'm just going to start. I'm going to start writing my status reports from this system instead of from the 5 other systems. I'm going to check my work. I'm going to make sure that I'm not blowing smoke, but and start and introduce another voice into the conversation. The barrier to entry on that is very low. So like anybody in your audience could do this, because you just have to have a series of keys, and you have to tell Claude what those keys are, and you say, go get the data. Right. So I think your point of like, can we just introduce another voice into the conversation? Absolutely. And when you realize that you're answering 95% of the questions based on 5 fields that you're pulling out of Salesforce, okay, and then you can present back to the salespeople and the business development people more information than Salesforce ever gave them, then it becomes an obvious, right? It becomes a layup to say, like, all right, well, I guess I don't read this anymore.
Right. You've proved it to them, so to speak. Right. And in fact, they see the strength in it. They become more empowered and more effective because they are using the new tool and new source of solutions rather than the traditional one. Okay, that makes a lot of sense there. A little bit more work, if you think, because essentially that means that you have to run parallel. You have to, of course, keep Salesforce up and that cost up for a period of time while you get the new solution up and running. So a little bit of overlap in time and cost and heavier weight on kind of a department like yours. But I think the end result, and once those things get momentum, people start realizing it.
So you make the investment in that center of excellence, and it doesn't have to be a substantial investment, and you should see the returns within 2 years. You should absolutely see the returns.
Yeah.
It depends on how voracious the leadership is. Like if they want to blow it up, because like they would rather reduce IT expenses by 50% than staff expenses by 20%. Like, okay, we're going to make some sacrifices. But if it's we want to do it the right way, but we also don't want to like keep feeding the dragon. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just introduce it into the conversation. I think that's right.
Well, initially was focusing on AI displacing people, and I think we've already seen some of that. Although I think a fair portion of the layoffs of now are people had kind of overstaffed their departments a little bit, and now they're using AI is certainly helping a little bit, but it's only part of the reason that they're reducing. I think that will actually accelerate because AI will get better and better at doing operations and things that people can do. Then we've talked a little bit about how applications are going to be not necessarily replaced, but certainly diminished, or their core costs will reduce drastically because they're providing a structure and information rather than a true application anymore. Are there other areas that we can't think of right now, or that we should consider, I should say, that AI will assist with? I mean, innovation, advertising, other things that direct areas that other than just technology and people?
I think so. I think, and this is not an area I've spent as much time on as the enterprise side, but I think there are dimensions of our business that feel a little bit gambly. Right. You said advertising. Advertising is a great example of that. The click-through rates and the SEO and all the things that those teams work on, like, it feels like voodoo, right? It feels like magic. And sometimes it works great and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, nobody can explain why. Supply chain works that way. Information security has a bit of well, I don't know. So, like, let's just spend more to protect us against the I don't. So I think these areas that are amorphous, that are unpredictable and tend to be expensive because they're unpredictable, I think we're going to see AI bring some clarity into those spaces, right? I mean, we're already seeing it on information security, because information security is a game of, like, there's a lot of variables and they're all changing a lot. So it's very difficult for a human. It's very difficult for a deterministic program. It's not actually difficult at all for an AI. Right. Like, that's its bread and butter. The behavior of advertising, the behavior of SEO, the influence of social media on traditional website media, on, more traditional magazine media. Again, less and less of those things are going to be mysterious. And so I think we'll see more control on the less controlled costs, right? That businesses naturally have. This is the part that I don't think is getting enough attention. What we've seen time and time again is when there's a technology that disrupts an industry or a marketplace, and we lose a lot of jobs because of it. Every single time we've created more because of that new thing. And so I think the thing we can't see right now is, like, so we can see the bad news right now. We can see that, the demand for people who are sort of organizational connective tissue that are doing that kind of thought work, knowledge work, like, those roles are under threat. There's nothing that you can say about that. But what we're not able to see is, like, what are the new roles that are going to appear? What are the new jobs, new industries, new businesses that are going to appear because the landscape is evolving and is changing? Yeah. And some of that, I think, is going to be the next generation of software vendors. Right. I think, and some of it's going to be the next generation of lawyers. Right. And that sort of thing. So I think we need to prepare for there being a whole new set of costs in the ledger that we just can't predict yet. So we're kind of going to, clear room for that, for sure.
Okay.
But I do think in the short term, some of the variable costs will become more predictable than they are now.
Fair enough. And as far as people getting replaced and what departments and functions are kind of, it seems like it started off with a lot of developers were originally targeted, or at least that's what the applications were most effective at doing their work. And it's interesting. I had a good friend who was is a software developer for a major company. He said they went from getting bagels every day and, anything they could do to try to keep them happy, to make sure they stay with the company, to, he said, it became like Hunger Games. So the colleagues were getting let go. And then, it was all became about what can you produce? How quickly can you adjust to AI? So it's been a very tough on that group.
Yes.
And then there's call centers, but it seems like everything else is a little bit more spread out. There has been talk about impact heavy on the legal field, because for particularly contracts and a lot of that type of work can be done perhaps even better by AI. It can even be negotiated with another counter AI and then just approved by attorneys and that type of thing. What else do you think? Is it going to hit everything other fields pretty evenly after that, or are there other segments that are going to be and functions that are going to be much more rapidly converted versus later?
I actually think it's going to be horizontal. I don't think it's going to be focused by industry or anything like that. I think it's going to be horizontal, and this is. You're getting a free preview into the book that I'm working on now.
Oh, I didn't realize there was a volume 2.
Yeah. Well, no, it's related, but take a look at the amount of judgment that is necessary for your role.
Right.
Right. So if your role is primarily to be judgment into the conversation, negotiations, sales, talking to other humans, strategy, making decisions that'll impact the company. Those positions are less likely to be sort of eaten up by AI.
Okay.
They're more likely to be accelerated by AI, right? Like, because AI is going to make more information available to you in an easier way. So the, sort of decision maker roles, judgment-based roles, AI can't replace that.
Right.
It can make you worse at it or better at it, but it can't replace that. Right. If your role is very low on the judgment scale, I take the requirements and I bring them to the developers, right? Which is the joke from a movie. But if you are, what I said earlier, connective tissue in the organization, right? You pull the reports and do the analysis and give it to the manager so that she can do her status report.
Yeah.
That role has nothing to do with me in that role, but that role is completely replaceable.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to start seeing in our very knowledge-based economy, roles like that just disappearing. Right. The conversation about developers right now is blown out of proportion. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on besides AI, and also like we're all still trying to figure out what to do about AI. But I think once the dust settles and we're able to see the patterns, I think we're going to start seeing that connective tissue, which is in every department and every organization, right? Because right now it's necessary because of the silos that we talked about. When the silos come down, those translators are not as necessary. So I think you look at the role, you look at where they are and the sort of how much judgment do you need and expertise do you need to do your job? And if it's high, you're probably okay, right? Like from a role perspective, and you should plan to staff that in the future and that sort of thing. But if it's purely connective, you're not going to be able to explain to your shareholders why you're still paying a person to do that.
Right. You can't justify that. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, when you ask for additional funds for resources for AI, I'm hearing most CIO types, CTO types are getting told that basically their expectation is almost like immediate payback. And is that a fair request? And are you able to accommodate that, or is that a longer horizon to really feel the benefits of AI being implemented? When you talked about you mentioned 2 years. If you invest a lot, 2 years will make a huge difference. But I don't see a lot of management teams and shareholders being that patient.
No, and we saw this with big data as well when that was a thing, where the boards were expecting, we're going to make this investment, but I want to see like new product.
Yeah.
Right. Because I read this one article because there were new products. So I think we all know there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? There's not I'm going to give you $100 to invest in AI and I'm going to see $300 in return tomorrow. I think the conversation isn't about purchase AI, see return. The conversation is like, what are we trying to accomplish, right? What are we going for? Are we going for resolving, like reducing the number of defects in our software? Are we going for reducing the amount of time that our customers are spending on the phone with our agents? Are we going for, and once you know that becomes the conversation that we all know how to do because we're business people, right? Like, can you use AI to reduce the number of calls? Probably. How long will that take? A couple of months. Now you've got a conversation.
Yeah,
right.
Now you got to have that conversation all day long.
Right. And you reduce that cost by 10%. That's going to be substantial for some companies. And so 10% material, and you're going to make an investment to bring that down. If you're a tech executive and they come to you and they're like, I want you to like build AI into everything, and then I expect the cost to be down by 20%. You've stepped off the lot. Like, you're not having a business conversation anymore. You're having like a fantasy conversation. Or I think we just need to bring those conversations back to what we know how to do, which is like, what's your expected outcome? What's your objective? And then sometimes AI is going to be the right answer. Sometimes it's not.
And is it, you mentioned a couple of, we talked about a couple of tools that came up, but we didn't drill down on it. You mentioned Claude. I mentioned Copilot. Are there certain AI players that are doing it that you're impressed by, that you want to call out, and others that are more hype that you feel a little less strong about?
So I'm a huge fan of Claude. Huge fan, in all the different dimensions. I use it as for code. I use it to do research. I do it to like find how long I'm supposed to cook brown rice, and all of those dimensions, conversationally, technically, like very, very happy with it. The price point is reasonable for what it is.
Okay.
I haven't spent as much time on ChatGPT. It's fine. I think that, there are different AIs that are better at different things. So like the Google Gemini is, I think, great from a consumer point of view. Like if you want to figure out how to make brown rice, or you want to figure out because it's Google, and so it knows a lot of things, but nobody uses it to write code yet. If somebody's starting from scratch, I would absolutely go with Claude.
Okay.
Because it's very, very accessible, and I sort of have not found the limits of what it's able to do. I mean, I've been doing some pretty crazy stuff with it. So
okay. Yeah, and it seems like it has a stronger depth to where it can help and anything that you need it for, whether it's business applications, productivity tools, and stuff like that. It has a lot of different dimensions that it does well, as opposed to other ones. I think probably have a few dimensions that it may do better, or is equally. But
it's evolving so fast. I will say, because I feel obligated to say this, the OpenClaw thing, I would advise people not to do. Like the download it and run it on your own machine thing. Like there's, from a security perspective, like if you don't know what you're doing, you're introducing a substantial amount of risk into
interesting,
whatever. So I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't run your own unless you really know what you're doing. But it's pretty easy to experiment with all of them and see which one you're comfortable with. And I think for most people, it's just going to come down to the UI and the voice. Because if all you're doing is asking you how to make rice, you're all going to have the right answer.
They're all going to be pretty good information, right? Right. Okay, fair enough. And then as far as like tips to leadership in there, and other than you mentioned to have realistic expectations and make sure that the answer to every problem isn't AI. It depends on the problem and how you face that. What other aspects would you like to see from leadership? Are they doing well on this, or are they too caught up in the hype? Are they part of a problem or the solution?
AI for a lot of people is a solution in search of a problem, right? And so I think for senior leadership, you have to watch yourself and watch your team and make sure that's not what's happening. Because I think it's happening a lot. And so I have this thing and I need to find a use for it. And then I need to come up with a KPI for it. And then I have to measure that. And then I have to justify it, right? Which is, as you know, like the wrong direction, right? The wrong. Right. So I think be aware when this is I'm doing it because I think you told me to problem. And the other thing, which is harder, is we need to start being aware of when we as an organization are showing those signs of resistance, showing those signs of addiction, right? Because those things now, when you talk to your head of sales and he's like, if I don't have Salesforce, I'm not going to beat my numbers.
Okay.
Right? That's what he's saying. And come on, right? Like that's probably not true. Maybe it is true. It's probably not true. Grain of salt in those conversations, because nobody's doing it to be malicious, but the organizations get addicted to technologies. And so I think from a leadership perspective, we need to pay attention to, is this resistance instinctual or is it rational? Like, this is where all the information is. And if I lift it out, it's going to unsort, and then I'm not going to be able to meet this compliance regulation. Okay, that's real. Let's figure out if that's worth solving or not. Okay. We're all resisting. I see it every day. Every conversation. People much smarter than me, like still trying to figure out, like, is what I described in latent vector actually possible, or am I smoking something? Right. So the first thing is to make sure that people aren't clinging, right? With their heads in the sand. Like, are we having a rational conversation? Because 3 years from now, we're going to sure as hell hope that we were having a rational conversation.
Right. After all this investment, absolutely.
Right.
I'll make this one of the final questions here, is that is about kind of risk, and you touched on a little bit there. To the extent like there's certainly, I know when I ask AI information, there's certainly what they call hallucinations and just failures. But then what about overall just data risk in general, the security? Because there's heavy fines now, particularly in Europe, for any privacy data gets exposed and those type of things. And if AI is taking that information, is there some risk on that? So what do you think are the risks of AI, of using it at this point? Hopefully will it get better? I guess I'll ask it that way.
So I think the way I think about AI from a risk perspective is the same way I think about other software from a risk perspective, because it just makes it easier, because we are all used to thinking about it that way. So if it's free, then you're the product.
Right.
So I try very hard not to let anybody install anything free, because they're doing something with our data. And you have a responsibility to the owner of the information.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I have my customers' data. I have to be a responsible custodian of their data, and which means I can't give it to an AI without their permission.
Right.
The same thing as, putting it out on the web or whatever. It's this. So I think if we use the same muscle memory, then we're in a much better place. The risk to data loss, I don't think it's real, but I don't think it's substantial. Right. I think, it is possible for someone to manipulate Claude into giving information that you gave it. But it's an edge case. And for most of us, nobody's going to spend that kind of time and money to try to find out if I asked about brown rice. Right.
Right.
But again, if it's free, like the Claude bot is free, and you're installing it on your computer, and you're giving it a lot of rights. Like,
Right.
If I say it like that, it's not a good idea. So I think when you're talking to your employees, when you're talking to your family, just sort of reinforce the fact that it's from your computer point of view, it's just software. And how do you think about software, right? And what do you want to protect?
Yeah, I think it makes great sense. Dave, is there anything that I'm leaving out that you think is an important aspect? I tried to kind of cover the bases of particularly as it affects the cost basis of companies. Anything that you think I left out that you think we should be discussing?
I think that one of the things that we need to do as sort of people is to think about what the implications are on a global scale for this kind of trend that's happening, because what we saw with a news report in IBM stock, what we're seeing with job losses in various pockets. These are patterns that I think are going to reverberate across the planet. And so if you take a look at, world economies where they are primarily outsourced connective tissue functions, right, then the implications are much greater to them than they are to you and me. And so I think there's a dimension to this that goes beyond the business. It goes beyond like my paycheck. And I think it's important for us to at least keep that in mind. Because like anything else, we're doing this to ourselves, right? Like we invented this technology. We're introducing this technology into our businesses. We're harming ourselves with this technology. This is the pattern. And so I think as people and as investors and as human beings, like being aware of the fact that this is going to have worldwide implications is important. Not that we could do anything about it necessarily, but I think it's important to keep in mind.
No, I think that's key, and not so much from how to manage the cost, but just understanding getting into the whole ethics and implications and those type aspects of AI that I think is a area of study exclusive that you could exclusively dedicate yourself to, because it's massive and critical. So I appreciate David, you coming on, sharing this with listeners, that some great insight. Look forward to your next book. So let me know when that's out.
I'll send you a draft.
I would very much appreciate that. I've really enjoyed the first one. It was eye-opening to me. So thank you for your time here.